Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever around the world. This is the Dr. Sophia Rothschild Show. With me today is the Right Honorable Supervisor Matt Dorsey of District 6 in San
Six. Yep.
Francisco. Um, he's been elected a few years now. And Supervisor, welcome.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
So, last year there was an election,
Mhm.
and there's been some change. We now a slight majority moderate on the board of supervisors.
Mhm.
The police commission has been revamped somewhat, and
Mhm.
we new mayor. So going forward, what are some of the things you have for us this year in terms of moving forward even more
Mhm.
with the issue of the fentanyl crisis
Mhm.
and public safety?
Right. So the two priorities that I identified that were really the rationale for why I wanted to be on the Board of Supervisors when Matt Haney was elected to the Assembly had to do with public safety and making recovery a priority, making that front and center in our response to the drug crisis that we're facing. I have been candid about my own journey in recovery from addiction. I identify as a recovering addict and alcoholic, and this made politics personal to me in a way that had never been personal before. Even though I wasn't an endorser of Daniel Lurie as a candidate for mayor, I really have been impressed with, since his election, how well we're working together. And on public safety and drug policy, and really elevating recovery to the forefront of that, we're very much aligned, and I really appreciate the partnership that we have had. The election, I think, gave us a board of supervisors where I think now I have more allies, but I also think that sometimes when we look at who's the progressive and who's the moderate, I don't know that those labels necessarily fit all the time. I mean, the reality is most of the votes it's been a split. It hasn't been a 6-5 vote. It's been just a couple of people voting the other way. So I feel like right now there is a new spirit in City Hall of cooperation. Raphael Mandelman was elected president unanimously by the board, and we didn't know if that was going to happen. I'm very excited about that because I'm a big supporter of Raphael Mandelman. So it feels pretty good. I don't know that rancor will always be absent from City Hall, but right now it feels like it is for the time being, and we're moving forward cooperatively. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, excellent. I noticed that now on some of the air streets there's been those mobile police commands.
Mhm.
Will there be more of those in the works, or is 16th Street more like a test bed?
So I think there's some work that they're doing on police deployments on 6th Street and 16th Street. And to me, I'm going to defer to the law enforcement professionals. Where I can make the biggest difference as a policymaker, I think, is doing everything we can to solve the longer-term problem that we have with our public safety staffing. I have really prioritized police staffing in particular because we have a disproportionately large generational cohort of police officers who are my age, maybe a little younger, who are reaching retirement age. And they're at a stage in their career where they've got another 15 or 20 years that they still want to work. So in many cases, they're going off to other police departments and public safety agencies. I had a retirement measure that I had hoped would sweeten the deal a little bit. Unfortunately, in November, it fell short. I think it was a winnable campaign. I haven't decided yet whether I will seek to go back again in June of 2026. But I do want to work with Mayor Lurie and his team, and I think the mayor has identified public safety as priority number one for him. And he also, I think correctly, is saying it's not just police staffing, it's also sheriff staffing, and it's also 911 dispatchers.
Yeah, because I've been told by many police officers that they like the job here, but the one thing that there are departments who are giving them better deals, and they're living for greener pastures.
Yeah.
So, are they? How will the city address that?
So I'm open, and I had a resolution a couple of years ago that was encouraging the city to do a price match guarantee, effectively. Sort of if there's another jurisdiction that is offering an incentive or recruiting bonus, we would match it. It would be nice to kind of end the arms race with some of the competition out there. It's a very competitive environment for public safety professionals. So anybody listening to this who is unhappy with their job, they should become or consider becoming a police officer or sheriff or 911 dispatcher, because there's never been a better time in terms of competition. And, it's also not unique to law enforcement, although the drop-off is particularly acute in the law enforcement professions, but the labor market generally is shrinking. And in fact, the labor market in the United States is probably not going to turn the corner. I think I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, I think it might be 2040 that we're going to start growing again. But right now, it's just demographically. Yeah. We know what the size of the labor market's going to be because they're all kids now.
Yeah. And one thing too, again, speaking of other jurisdictions, I know that the current mayor wants to address the issue of other jurisdictions just dumping all their, sending all their homeless people all the way to San Francisco. So I know last time you were here, you spoke to me about, bringing forth some plans to kind of discourage that. Where does that stand? Where did that stand?
So we have, we know that there is a phenomenon of what's sometimes referred to as drug tourism, or a sort of a destination city effect for drug-related lawless conduct. We know that there is a percentage of folks who come here to engage in bad and illegal behavior. At different times, we try to measure that. I have asked for a couple of years in a couple of different ways if departments could do a known address history report. These numbers aren't unknowable. One of the things that the obstacles that I have hit when I have tried to do this is making a request through a legislative inquiry, or just asking, really doesn't solve for the problem of we need the resources to fund even doing the report. So I do have legislation in the works, and I have identified funding in the opioid settlement dollars that David Chu and his predecessor, City Attorney Dennis Herrera, did. They filed civil litigation against many of the opioid manufacturers and distributors. So we're going to be getting about $300 million over the next probably 10 or 15 years. So I'm working on legislation that is going to apportion some of those funds into different categories around drug policy, but having a report so that we know whether and to what extent we are a destination city for drug misbehavior is going to be really important to inform how we respond to it.
Excellent. Because I noticed that also there's been a move to address some of these open-air drug markets. What are some of the plans in the works this year in regard to the open-air drug markets?
Yep. So the San Francisco Police Department has convened a drug market agency coordination center that is on the 1100 block of Market Street, and they're doing a great job of coordinating city departments and resources to address some of the open-air drug dealing. Now, it still goes on, but I will say in the neighborhood I live in, which is Mid-Market, most people recognize that we have seen some improvements. It wasn't that long ago, 2 or 3 years ago, that we saw people, it was a 24-hour-a-day phenomenon of drug dealing going on. So we're in a better place now, but you wouldn't say it was better if you were out at 9 o'clock at night at 7th and Market Street. It's still pretty bad at night. So we still have a lot of work to do. There is some uncertainty because in my view, and from what I understand, one of the real unsung heroes of the success we have had in the drug market and open air drug sales aspect of it, the drug dealers, has been the U.S. Attorney's Office, and in particular Izzy Ramsey, who was President Biden's appointee to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Izzy Ramsey was let go by President Trump. That was not a surprise. We don't know who the next U.S. attorney is going to be. Right now, there's an acting U.S. attorney whose name I forget, but there is somebody who's sort of in a holding pattern right now. It took the Biden administration about a year to make a decision on who the U.S. attorney was going to be, so I don't know what the timing is going to be like for the Trump administration. I get nervous whenever I talk about the Trump administration because it's just we're in uncharted waters, and I don't get what they're doing. Even by the standpoint of their articulated vision, it still doesn't make sense explaining what they want to do. If the first Trump administration was an indication, they did have a very good U.S. attorney in David Anderson. It wouldn't be bad if Dave Anderson came back as U.S. attorney. That would be my vote, but who knows?
Yeah. And speaking of U.S. attorney and the feds, do you see more cooperation with federal law enforcement in regard to these open air drug markets?
I think it's going to be very challenging under the Trump administration. And for everything that I am hearing from law enforcement is that the Trump administration is really singularly focused on immigration. Now that has a role to play in the drug markets. I think we have seen in San Francisco, and the Chronicle did some phenomenal enterprise reporting a couple of years ago about the drug dealers from Honduras, yes, and the amount of money that they are making and then sending back to Honduras, and some of the mansions that they're building down there. But we seem to have that is a real phenomenon. Yeah. So the federal government has a role to play in that. But as with so much that the Trump administration is doing, who knows? Who knows what's coming next, and we'll see.
I agree. Yeah, because I know also too there was in the past the state law enforcement, the CHP was involved. Are they still involved in this? Police is still involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know that there was coordination, and I think there still is coordination with DMAC. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time that the California Highway Patrol had started taking some cases and doing some patrols around drug markets. The governor also detailed National Guard personnel to help with some of the cases. Now, this wasn't something that we were seeing on the street, but when I talked to Chief of Police Bill Scott, he said it was really helpful to have the assistance of National Guard personnel to do some of the casework. And I don't want to get into the details of what that involves, but there's a lot of investigation work to develop those cases where it really can be helpful, even if it's not something that we're seeing on the street. I don't think there is a problem that San Francisco is facing today that isn't caused by or made significantly worse by the scale of public drug use we are seeing in our city. And I think that has to be priority number one. That includes making sure that we're prioritizing a fully staffed police department, fully staffed sheriff's department, and all of that. But I also feel that we need to be making use of things like treatment-mandated felonies, which voters enacted with Proposition 36. I support coercive interventions when people are at the end of their rope and addicted to drugs on the street. I think we should be mandating drug treatment through the courts.
And you mentioned the sheriff department. I know it's in a previous sheriff had wanted to move more sheriff into doing on the street law enforcement work. Do you think that's something we should revisit? I
mean, I'm open to creative conversations. I think right now we have staffing challenges with both the sheriff's department and the police department. And once in a while, you'll hear people talk about, well, we have a couple hundred cops, San Francisco police at the airport. Why don't we put them back in the city? But then it creates, well, then what do we do at the airport? So we could have San Francisco sheriffs there. Maybe we could have San Mateo law enforcement and do it by an MOU or contract. The reality is I don't think there's a quick fix or a certain we should have sheriffs do one thing or the other. I will say that my sense of the challenges that 21st century cities are facing in some of the unique and new challenges that the synthetic drug era is presenting us, I think we have to be more focused on the demand side interventions around drug policy, because I think the supply side interventions when it comes to synthetic drugs are going to be having diminishing returns. We sometimes talk about, you'll hear the Trump administration talk about shutting down the inflow of precursor chemicals for fentanyl from China or from Mexico. But the reality of synthetic drugs is this is far more easily transportable, it is far more profitable, far more addictive, and tragically far more deadly than any drug that we've ever encountered. But I think the feature of synthetic drugs, that they can be manufactured cheaply and easily, domestically. There was a statistic I heard to the effect that the entire nation could be addicted to fentanyl with 2 truckloads of fentanyl. Yeah. It isn't something where like the old days where it's a poppy crop from Afghanistan that has to be through the demand side interventions is where we're going to have success or failure, but the supply side, I don't think we're going to see success like we used to in the years past.
Yeah. And a lot of the in regarding the public safety issue, how many more police do you think we should have?
So the last I looked, we were a little over, I want to say 550 or thereabouts, short of the minimum staffing level that we're supposed to have.
That's a lot.
It is. It is basically between a quarter to a third of our police force isn't there. And a city that is as invested in being safe and welcoming and clean to conventions and for tourists and for shoppers and for commuters. We want a vibrant downtown, and there's people who, in addition to the nature of work has changed with a lot of people working remotely, we're not helping ourselves when we have a lot of public and drug-related disorder on the street where people don't want to come to San Francisco. It's not particularly welcoming when that's what you're encountering.
Yeah. And I've heard of this plan where, for example, they say, okay, you have some people who are homeless, why don't you pay them to clean the streets so they have a meaningful job, and at the same time the city gets cleaner. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, I would be open to any kind of workforce development idea. I have said that one of the policies that I hope to work on in the next couple of years for people who are coming out of drug treatment would be, I would love to develop a partnership program with some of our workforce development and job training partners so that we have a guaranteed placement and even a guaranteed basic income as a reward for anybody finishing a drug treatment program in San Francisco. It's a policy idea that I've called Sober New Deal. I think we have to get through this budget process before we have a serious conversation about that. But I'm open to things that will give people purpose when they're down on their luck. So I'm open to ideas.
Yeah, because and that's one thing we need. We need leaders like you. We're going to be more open up to new ideas because, as I said, everything should be on the table. Nothing should be on the table.
Yeah.
And also, with that being just let me piggyback on that a little bit. I know, like in states like Utah, which is a red state.
Mm.
What they did was they just went out and they built these micro housing units,
Mm.
and they took the homeless people, put them in those units, and those who had drug problems, they get treatment on the site.
Mm.
Those who need work, they get them work cleaning the streets, and those are they have jobs. Well, but that's how they solve their problem. How do you are the city willing to look into the Utah model?
Yeah, so we actually have in my district on Gough Street some tiny homes. So it's an approach that that is included. I think it has had some success. Mayor Lurie right now is working on identifying beds and locations throughout the city. One flashpoint of that is, listen, we probably need all of the above.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to borrow a term from, the pro-housing YIMBY movement,
Yeah.
The more things on the table, the better. We shouldn't be, much like drug policy, I think homelessness is something where there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. And certainly that's come up with some of the work I'm doing on recovery housing for making recovery and drug-free options part and parcel of our permanent supportive housing portfolio. But I would say that tiny homes should be part of it. We've had success with that in my district on Gough Street. And I'm going to be interested to see as the mayor's plan scales up and rolls out. I have expressed that my district 6, which is south of Market and Mission Bay and South Beach and Treasure Island, has more shelters than any other district in the city. I don't want to say that I'm not going to be not in my backyard supervisor on anything, and I think we all have a role to play. Every neighborhood, every part of our city, every supervisor district. But I am urging the mayor, and Supervisor Bilal Mahmoud is also urging, because he represents the district that is a close second. That it's the Tenderloin that has the second highest number of shelter facilities. We need to see some geographic equity, and sometimes it can be a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that ends up being something like a containment zone. That people will say, well, we'll put the housing there because that's where the problem is, and then the problem is there because of the housing, and then we'll put more housing there so basically it's the sort of hamster wheel, and that's not really the way we should be doing it. In much the way we are doing rezoning and living up to the commitments we made in our housing element, we need to do that for supportive housing and for shelters as well.
Excellent. I like that.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, also I know that District 9 and District 10 also has been hit with a lot
Yeah.
of houses.
Yeah.
Now speaking of homeless shelters, I know in the past there are certain cases of people being allowed to change shelter for like 10, 20 years. It sounds like in Embassy South, that people are allowed to stay in there for all these years without moving on.
Oh.
Should there be a limit as to how long a person can stay in the shelter?
I don't know. It's not something that I have not seen this come up. I don't ever want to be in a situation where we're putting people onto the street if they're good in a location. I think ideally what we should be doing is trying to get people into permanent supportive housing or transitional housing as they're making their way out of. In many cases, it's not the case that everybody who's homeless is struggling with a substance use disorder, nor is it the case that everybody who's got a substance use disorder is struggling with homelessness. But in the Venn diagram, there is quite a bit of an overlapping circle for that. For people who are homeless and struggling with substance use disorders or alcohol use disorders, I think the more that we can do to support people in their recovery journeys, in transitional housing. I'm really excited about a couple of facilities in my district that are going to be drug-free options on 9th Street, just down the couple blocks down where the Civic Center Motor Inn is. That is going to be run by Westside Community Services. It's the first drug-free and recovery-oriented transitional housing facility that our city's Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing is going to be implementing. And separate from that, we also have a permanent supportive housing facility for transitional age youth. It's going to be focused on the LGBTQ plus community, but it's also a drug-free community. And that means it's a sort of, I guess the way that sometimes we can describe that is sort of California sober. This is, if it's a legal drug like marijuana or alcohol, it's fine. You're in a place where you have a lease and your own apartment, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the use or possession of illicit drugs on site would be a grounds for termination. No, lease termination. It would be grounds for eviction. Nobody will be terminated or have their lease terminated immediately. Anybody who would be relapsing would be offered treatment, and that's a standard practice in even recovery housing. But that is really important. There's 2 facilities that I'm looking forward to having in the portfolio and that are in my district.
Excellent. I noticed a few years ago they had these. There was a temporary place where we can go like a one-stop. They can go and get all different services. Will we see that come back again?
So there's on 6th Street. There's a sort of a respite that they're experimenting with. Mayor Lurie's policy director, Kunal Modi, released some data on that. And what I really appreciate about the Lurie administration is right from the very start, they said, listen, we're going to try some things and we're going to measure it and we're going to see how it's working. So they're doing some self-assessments. I think we're trying to figure out how to address people who have needs and who are out on the street and in unsheltered homelessness situations. The one message that I have conveyed to the mayor about that is sort of an observation and frustration that I have with some of the way that we are dealing with unsheltered homelessness in San Francisco right now. I think we have developed a way of bringing services to people on the street that leaves the people on the street. Some of this is kind of COVID era things where I think, listen, we weren't at our best. We're coping with a once in a century pandemic. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. There were decisions that we made in terms of shelter in place hotels and how we were responding to street conditions that weren't great, but we just had the 5-year anniversary of COVID, and I think we are at a point now where we need to start making some decisions. Is this going to be the same? Is this the new normal, that we're going to see this level of public drug use on the street, or are we going to do something about it? So my message to the Lurie administration is, if we're going to have street teams, I think the standard of success has to be measured with, are we getting people off the street? Because if we're leaving people on the street, that is not success.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of that, how about more, I know people were saying that put more cops on the beat and replace them with civilians to do desk duty work.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that's possible?
Yes. So civilianization has been a priority for the San Francisco Police Department going back to the 1990s. And in fact, there was the original police staffing charter amendment that was passed by voters in 1994 emphasized that we need to do everything we can to civilianize law enforcement roles. I think the department over the years has done that. I think we could probably find some room for improvement. Based on the studies that I have seen, I don't know if there is any. We might be able to get a few more cops into cop roles by replacing those positions with civilians. I was one of them, interestingly enough. When I was at the police department, I was a member of the command staff who was a civilian. So it wasn't, my role was I could do my role, and you didn't need a cop to do it, and nor would you want me to be doing a cop role. But I think we should continue to look at opportunities for civilianization, but the reality with police staffing is we're not getting out of this on the cheap. Yeah. We need to hire more cops.
Yeah. And speaking of issue of public safety, this past year, I mean, roughly about 20 stores, services got closed.
Yeah.
Walgreens and all others closed. And I was talking to this lady, a good friend of mine, Rachel, and says, I remember at one point when I was looking at my doctorate, I was a law enforcement officer, and I was also capture these crooks, and when I'm with the police, they don't prosecute them, they
Yeah.
release them back in the street. I know recently they changed the law, but still, people are saying they need to see more tougher action to put a stop to
Right.
this thing, because what people don't understand is that when a store closes, people lose their job.
Yeah.
So it creates a domino effect.
Mhm.
So what plan is San Francisco planning to? What plan does San Francisco has to address this issue of this?
Right.
I know it has gone down a little bit,
Mhm.
but it needs to go on more.
Right. So this is something that the mayor is really prioritizing as well. His policy director on downtown development is Ned Siegel, who was the former CFO of Twitter. One of the things that I like about Ned is that, I will say this as a mid-market resident and as a supervisor who represents this, I appreciate that Ned worked at Twitter, in the Twitter building in my district, and understands that downtown includes mid-market. You know, to me, this is that when we talk about downtown, I want to make sure that we are talking about all of Market Street down to Van Ness. I think there's a number of things that are going to need to change: zoning, housing production, office to residential conversion. We need to do more to have mixed-use neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And get away from the sort of 20th century vision of a downtown that closes up and becomes a ghost town at 5 o'clock. That didn't make the transition very well into the era of work from home. I don't think it's an accident that the neighborhoods that are succeeding, where the economy is booming, where vacancy rates for offices and residences is low, are mixed-use neighborhoods like the East Cut, like Mission Bay, neighborhoods I represent. We have a blueprint for what's working. So the things that I'm prioritizing are public safety, police staffing. Obviously, that's got to be a part of that. I don't want to say that's the panacea that solves everything, but I will say the inverse of that. We're not solving anything without that. So we need having a fully staffed police, sheriff, and 911 dispatch operation. Our public safety apparatus has to scale to what a city needs. Right now, it isn't, and when that happens, what it means is there's a level of ambient lawlessness that plays out that is really unsettling, and it's just killing our economy and our attraction to tourists and conventions and everything that supports our economy. The other thing, though, is zoning is going to be an interesting conversation, because the zoning map, I believe, if it didn't come out yet, I don't know if you know. I've seen some of the preview. I think there's some things that are going to be helpful. I would support upzoning in my district, even though most of the development over the last decade has been there. But particularly in the hub area around Van Ness and Market, I would like to see, and I think we're going to see, opportunities for more high rises. It's an area we should be doing that, because it's a crossroads of the city. It's well served by transit. It's close to the Civic Center area. I think that can be the new East Cut in the next 10 years.
And to follow up, I think it's these areas have a very solid ground structure to handle the weight of a high rise.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point, because I think I represent a district that is at disproportionate risk for liquefaction. We do have most of the larger structures like Salesforce, and now Millennium Tower, I think, is going down to bedrock. I think that the experience that Millennium Tower had with having a mat foundation that started to have differential settlement, meaning sinking and tilting, made clear to everybody that bedrock is how we have to do this. So some of the features of the geotechnical analyses that in south of Market and Treasure Island and Mission Bay all of which are in my district, give me some anxiety. If we were to have a seismic event, there could be some. There's going to be some problems. I don't know that this is something that's life safety, but we could have a situation where there's buildings that are red tagged for a couple of days, and we could have thousands of people on the street, on the sidewalk.
As we always say, being penny wise and pound foolish. It's always, and a person who put out a degree in physics, it's always good to go down to solid bedrock.
Yeah.
And go on from there, because it might cost a few more dollars, but when we go on the solid bedrock and go up, the building is sure to survive an earthquake.
Yeah.
We can look at Miramar right now. A lot of buildings are tipping over, stopping over. That's a sign of poor structure, poor foundational structure.
So the city is going to be taking up some of the concrete construction updates too. This was something that over the years we have looked at unreinforced masonry, and had changes to our codes and things that we are doing. This is going to put some responsibilities on property owners. This is going to disproportionately affect some of the structures in South of Market. So that's going to be something we got to address. But it's a question of resilience, and even though we have near-term challenges, we can't drop the ball on the longer-term challenges. Not just being ready for seismic events and earthquakes, but also sea level rise. There's going to be a lot of activity in my district on this.
Yeah, because I know the last earthquake San Francisco was in 1989.
Yeah.
And I think some of the buildings over in the District 2 went tilt over. So I think we know that those areas are not good for high-rise structures.
Yeah.
That's just common sense.
And since the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, there has been a lot of shift in the development of San Francisco to the South of Market area. The liquefaction risk, and liquefaction is where it's basically a phenomenon of places where there's a lot of landfill. That was what contributed to some of the building failures in that and soft story construction, I think, in the marina back in 1989. I think structurally we should be in better shape, but liquefaction is something that's going to play out in many parts of South of Market and Mission Bay. Knock wood. This is the issue that I think we don't talk about enough, that I lose sleep over. But I am doing so. I have had, in fact, this week I had a meeting about some of the concrete construction work that we have to do. But I think Miramar, what we're seeing there, is a wake up call. This is our building codes, from what I understand, are a little more up to date than where they are. But I think we also saw some damage in Thailand that does have modern building codes. That this is we've got to be ready for this too.
Yeah, and also there's been this suggestion of trying to get more first responders to live in the city by giving them incentives. Is that possible?
I mean, I would be open. I mean, we're in a really difficult budget environment right now. I think our budget deficit over the next couple of years is under $1 billion. But given some of the uncertainties at the federal level, it could be worse than that. It is not as bad as it was after the Great Recession, but it's not that far away from where we were in the Great Recession. And this is going to be a very difficult year. I am open. Right now, I would say priority number one for our public safety agencies is let's get them fully staffed. Fire department, fortunately, I think is there. But I have heard, if we had a situation where we had an earthquake and, as happened in 1989, the Bay Bridge went, was out of service because of the part of it collapsed. We could be in a really difficult situation with getting first responders here and activated.
Yeah, and this is one of my final question. One of our viewers, Stan from District 6, want to know. Okay, currently we're spending lots of money on all these homeless programs, and then to spend all the money. How are some of the ways you're planning to work and bring forth legislation to make it more efficient?
Yeah. So this, What I would say when I was talking earlier, sometimes when we talk about homelessness, it is sometimes conflated with drug policy. And what I have said, and this, the reason again that I wanted this job is because of my own journey in recovery from addiction. Not everybody who's homeless is struggling with a substance use disorder, but a significant portion are. I feel very strongly that if we can do more to support and incentivize people in their journey to get off of illicit street drugs and either into medication-assisted treatment or into abstinence-based recovery, but into the arms of the recovery community, that will be the best money we could possibly spend. The thing that I know about the recovery community, not just in San Francisco, but I will say especially in San Francisco, the recovery community will have one another's back. And the more we can do to get people into recovery, the more there is a community that will support others in their journey to stay clean and sober and to stay in recovery. And taxpayers don't pay a dime for that. So I think the benefit of abstinence-based recovery, which includes medication-assisted treatment, is putting people into the arms of a community that is a multiplier effect of staying healthy. So I'm really excited about some legislation that I'm working on called the Recovery First Ordinance that is just an aspirational statement of public policy that the cessation of illicit drug use and attainment of long-term recovery from addiction, that has to be the primary objective of our drug policy. The mayor, Mayor Lurie, is making some important changes to harm reduction policies that I support, and I support harm reduction practices. But we're turning the turret, I think, in the right direction and getting focused on everything we can do to get people off drugs and into recovery. If we do that, we will see a lot of progress on street conditions and homelessness, retail theft, and other things.
Yeah. And once again, Supervisor Matt Dorsey, thank you so much.
Right.
You want the last show we did, we had over 1,000 views.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Great.
You're a
Thanks.
rock star.
You are too. Thanks so much for
Thank you so much.
having me. Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Yes.